The movie opens with United Nations negotiator Edward Douglas and two of his colleagues are drifting in the middle of the Java Sea. Turns out they have been sailing across the water for several days. After surviving a plane crash one day, the three friends get into a scuffle for the last bottle of precious water. As the fight intensifies, Edward's two friends take out their knives and stab each other before falling into the water. Shortly after, their blood attracts a nearby shark, then devours them as its food. Following this incident, the lone surviving Edward continues floating in the water for the next few days without any food or water. He is almost on the brink of dying due to extreme hunger and weakness, but fortunately he comes across a passing boat one day. Upon being rescued, Edward is treated by a veterinarian at Dr. Montgomery in the boat. After a few days of recovery, Edward is finally able to talk. The first thing he asks is his whereabouts, to which Montgomery informs him that he's on a seafaring vessel called the Onbach Plenary. Edward then tries to get up to contact his organization that Montgomery tells him to keep rusting because he's still dehydrated. He also tells him that the boat has no radio, that he promises to pay the captain to take him to Timor. However, when they arrive at Montgomery's destination, referred to as Morro's Island, he instead advises Edward to come along, assuring that he can use the radio on the island. After Edward agrees, Montgomery loads a cage full of rabbits off the boat. Before heading towards his destination, he leads Edward to his farmhouse, where he first and a shipment of rabbits at a pen. He then grabs one of them and kills it for Edward's meal. This one's name is Peter, and Peter's dead. Now you're going to eat Peter. Following this, Montgomery takes to the main house and excuses himself for a minute. Edward then looks around the certificates hanging on the walls and notices Dr. Morrow's name on them. He quickly recognized the doctor as a Nobel Prize-winning geneticist who escaped to an island 17 years ago in order to conduct his research. Just then Edward hears music and looks outside only to find a girl dancing. This piques his interest, so he walks up to her and strikes up a conversation. After a brief introduction, he learns that the girl's name is Aisa and that she was brought to this island by her father, who was none other than Dr. Moreau. But before they can converse further, Montgomery returns and turns him away from her. He then leads Edward to the gas room upstairs. On the way, Edward initiates a discussion on how Morrow vanished after becoming obsessed with his animal research. By Montgomery doesn't make any comments on this. As soon as they enter the guest room, Montgomery locks Edward inside, claiming that it's for his own safety. Bad as the night, and Edward manages to unlock the door via a pocket knife and make his way out. After wandering around the house for a while, he hears a strange moaning cry emanating from nearby. It goes curious. He follows the source of the sound and ends up in a laboratory facility. Inside he finds an array of medical equipment, incubation chambers, into liquid-filled cylinders containing what appear to be developing fetuses. Despite being in a confused state, he continues to walk towards decrying sound. Sooner after, he witnesses a startling sight: a female human llama and giving birth, with several doctors attending to the delivery. I'd have gone with human emu, but Dr. Moreau probably knows what he's doing. Suddenly, Edward's presence is noticed by one of the male doctors, who peels back his face mask to reveal that he is also a human-animal hybrid. Terrified, Edward runs away from the scene, but he is chased by the hybrids. Not long after, he comes across a user who offers to show the way out of the island under the condition that he will never speak anything against her father. Following this, she leads him to the seashore, but there are mutant guards stationed who spot them in a bid to evade capture. Or are you? So leads him deeper into the forest, where they come across several mutant creatures as well as a mutilated body of the rabbit. At one point they stumble upon another mutant creature who appears to be friendlier than the others. He introduces himself as a sassy mind Dr. Moreau has been watching. Did you mind? Who agrees to help them. He then takes them to a safe place that turns out to be the village of the mutants. He further guides them to a basement where he introduces them to the share of the law, a goat human hybrid. Edward is shocked to see his physical characteristics: large curled horns growing from his head and flake hands, and of course he's the leader. He's to go to the Sayer preaches the idea of being human instead of animalistic in terms of practicing manners, restraints and discipline. Before Edward can comprehend the ongoing situation, Morrow appears, who is apparently worshipped and referred to as the father by the mutants. Montgomery also shows up with the father and holds Edward at gunpoint, making him scared. However, Morrow didn't want to frighten him, so he orders Montgomery to hand over the gun to Edward. As soon as he received a weapon, Edward, panicking, fires in the air, which disturbs the other creatures in the surrounding area. Seeing this, Morrow presses a remote button and controls their actions. Here we learn that Morrell keeps the hybrids subjugated by using a remote-controlled and electrical implants surgically placed at birth under their skin. It's one of the few methods of security he has implemented against his creations. Morrow then calmly reassures a shocked Edward that he won't be harmed. After this, Edward is brought Back to the main house where Morrow introduces his 4 children Wagthy as Elohim Lang and he said he's almost as creative with names as Elon Musk. He then proceeds to explain his genetic experiment. He fused human DNA and animals in search of a higher being supposedly incapable of harm. The existing beastfolk are imperfect, but Morrow claims to be very close to the desired results. Edward is hesitant to accept what he's doing and asserts that it's completely unethical and illegal. Later, Edward is invited to dine with Morrow and his children. During this, Azar serves his father a plate of food with a half-eaten rabbit. This disgusts the apparent pacifist Dick Morrell as he strictly forbids meat eating. At the same time, Ayuza brings up the mutilated or rabbit witch she saw earlier. According to her, it was killed by a leopard-human hybrid Lomai. Hearing this, Morrow decides to carry out a trial the very next day and suggests to Edward that he attended as well, but before the sun rises, Edward tries to flee the island via a boat. However, his efforts are thwarted by humanoid rats that hows the entire about the scene and cuts to the trial, during which the father gathers all of his creatures outdoors. He begins the trial by reminding the laws of the island and then claims that someone has breached them. Sensing that he has been caught, Lomai violently charges towards Morrell, but the latter somehow manages to subdue him with his remote. Despite being knocked down, the leopard hybrid still tries to attack the father. Seeing this, as a yellow mercilessly guns down the creature, much to the shock of all in attendance. Morrow chastises him for his rash action, after which he orders him to arrange a proper funeral for the fallen hybrid Lomai. His body is then cremated publicly, but it is not disposed deaf immediately. A short while later, a human hyena called Hyena Swine comes to grieve his friend. He says while inspecting the charred remains, he notices a strange objects embedded in Lomai arm bone, the control implant. He then feels for the same implant on his own body, so he subsequently dig it out and removes it while roaring loudly in pain. With this realization, he vows no more pain and intends to spray the word to all the other mutants. In the next scene, Montgomery is seen injecting the mutant with some kind of drug. Intrigued, Edward asks about the same, to which Montgomery reveals that in addition to the implanted chip, the animals are controlled through regular drugging that prevents them from retrogressive. During this process, Hyena Swine refuses to get the dose administer Earth. When Montgomery tries to persuade him, the latter shows him his removed implanted chip, which freaks them out. As a result, he quickly dispatches the other mutants after the hyena to chase him through the woods, but aren't able to capture him. Later that evening, Edward tries to contact the outside world with the help of M. Lang, but soon after, Montgomery interrupts them and sabotages the radio, enlisting Edward's help in finding the hyena. Instead, in the meantime, Ayusta goes to talk to her father as she is worried about her physical regression. She shows how her canine teeth are becoming, thanks her fingernails getting sharper and her pupils appearing more like a cat. Regardless, her father reassures her that she's been for the way she is and that she doesn't need to worry about it. The same midnight, Hyena Swine and his fellow mutants, who are also now free of implants, break into the main compound and sneak into Morrow's living room. There they confront Morrell and demand the reason why they aren't fully human. At the father, who is unaware about the removal of the implant, casually tries to comfort the seemingly distraught creatures. However, they instead get angry and even reject the law. Sensing the imminent danger, Moore grabs his remote and presses the button repeatedly, but to no effect. Hyena Swine then shows him the removed ship before they all launch their attack and kill the father. Edward Howe happens to witness this from a distance and immediately fires a gunshot, scaring the group off. In the aftermath, Morrow's body is burnt down while his children, except for Azar, grief as is yellow that his daddy was a douchebag. Amidst of this emotional moments, Edward approaches the weeping Isa and attempts to console her. She tells him that she's getting transformed and Six has helped to retrieve a serum from the lab to prevent the same. Meanwhile, as Aloe steals Montgomery's handgun and goes to join Hyena Swine's faction, who are planning to take over the island. First of all, they set the only boat on fire, ensuring that no one can escape. In this process, they're approached by Zeller, who offers them to the island's armory section under a condition that they help him remove the implant. Afterwards, Edward goes to the lab only to find the place in complete disarray. He also she's Montgomery, who has gone insane. Edward asks for the serum, but Montgomery walks off after claiming that he has destroyed all of it. Now that he's alone in the lab, Edward looks around the fuss realty. In an unexpected turn of events, he finds samples in a file with his name on them. Upon going through it, he learns a shocking revelation. Morrow was planning to use his DNA to stop his regression, permanently completing his experiments. On the other hand, the insane Montgomery sit in the former doctor's throne. He talks as if he's a king and promotes hedonism among the mutants. Just then, as Azelle arrives at the scene and guns down Montgomery, and Swine Group also walks in and they take the means hostage back in the lab, and a user approaches Edward, who then reveals the ultimate Goal of her father. However, their conversation is abruptly interrupted by Izalo and his gang, who immediately charge towards them. At the gang members capture Edward, while as a sellout beats up A. He said he hangs her with the help of ropes, which results in her death. He then drags Edward to a swine, appraises his work, but unexpectedly guns as is a low down, having outlived his youth from this. Later, Hyena Swine forces Edward to accept that he's the new god of the island. Amidst the torture, Edward comes up with a new idea. He tells the hyena to become goded #1 by killing all of his gang members. Easily persuaded, Paina Swine turns around and shoots down all of his supporters, but while he's distracted, ambling trigger as an explosion that causes him to lose his gun. At taking this opportunity, Edward quickly retrieves Duggan and holds the hyena at gunpoint. Finding himself outnumbered and defenseless, Hyena Swine retreats into the burning building, where he burns himself alive. In anguish and despair with the threat finally neutralized, Edward now prepares to depart on a makeshift raft. The Sarah of the Law, Sassy Mon, and several other peaceful-minded mutants see him off on the shoreline. Before departing, Edward offers to return with professional scientists and doctors. You can create a serum to prevent their regression, however, to say or asserts that they don't want any more professionals. That they say employee want to return to their natural state of being and eventually end their creator's work. In the final scene, clips of various human wars and conflicts are shown as Edward reflects on the comparable savagery that can emerge in humans. The movie ends as he claims to have left the island in fear and that mankind is the
Subscribe and press the bell so you don't miss any updates.